difference between US exceptionalism and Chinese expansionism is that the former had a democratic means to buy into it. What I'm going to do in this debate is extensively go over how a consistent elite capture within the Chinese government has led to a very, very captured sense of benefits. These benefits only trickle down to the Beijing elite. It goes to no one else. I think in order for proposition to win this debate down the bench, they have to prove that shared benefits occur. These are shared benefits for all of the people, devoid of elite capture, devoid of the sort of legitimacy that they're setting for themselves. I'm going to show that to you. Before that, just a few departments. One, if your argument is that in the 2000s, economic development was linked to political expansionism, I genuinely say that's generally not true. The reason that China developed economically was because they opened up their borders to trade, which is fundamentally different from politically expanding into other countries. I genuinely think that's a straw man on their part. But secondly, it was also because of this history of reform that was brought by the Deng Xiaoping government in terms of horizontal constituencies, political reform, etc., etc. Those are generally linked to economic development. I think it has nothing to do with political expansionism. I don't agree with it. The last thing I want to say about this is this entire idea of this entire idea of consent, right? I think it's really, really important. People have not opted into this. I think this is genuinely important to say, but not only have people not opted into this superficially in terms of representation, people have been indoctrinated into believing this from day one. I think this is very, very important to say in this debate, especially because they legitimize the narrative, the point at which the speaker themselves says, oh, now this is between China and the West. Exactly. You are buttressing Xi's narrative that even if this is actively worse for you, you might as well take the bullet because we are fighting an ideological war, an existential war with the West. So we might as well take the bullet for now, even if it's at the expense of your own employment, even at the expense of your own economic benefit. I think that's really important. Let's talk about our case. I think the first thing I want to say is, who are the Chinese people we are talking about? Superficially, they're the demographic majority. But what does that mean? One, these are people who often work in low-skilled jobs across China. Often these are factory workers or people working in farming. Secondly, these people have little to no direct involvement in the CCP, which means that they're often not exactly party workers. They have some vague acquaintances, but they're not exactly the party president. What this fundamentally means is that these people are overwhelmingly poorer than the people who live in Shanghai and Beijing. These are people who live day to day on their wages, and secondly, they have less political capital. I think that's very important for several reasons. The first thing I want to say about this, which directly also clashes with their argument about investment, is that there is a massive employment displacement. I think this is genuinely true, because what usually happens within the One Belt, One Road program is that it works in terms of hierarchies. The Chinese, the manager of the factory is Chinese. It's all low-skilled workers from that country. Why is that? One, the domestic governments have to have some buy-in into this. It's not literally like they literally can't, the Pakistani government can't say, look, all these Chinese workers are working in our factories now, this is amazing. Like on some level, there have to be domestic workforce over there. But secondly, the incentive for that is that the labor is generally less expensive. That's part of the reason China is doing this in the first place. I think this is very important to say. Part of the reason that they're not investing in Xinjiang or Guangzhou and are investing in other countries is because there's low-skilled labor there that can be tapped by China to artificially expand its economy. I think that's really, really important. But the second thing I want to say is that it's very important to look at the short term and long term in terms of what happened. First, the capital does not go back for several reasons. China often operates at a loss in the vast majority of these countries to often move out and force out other domestic industries which exist. This is true for all 78 countries which are opting into the One Belt, One Road program. The reason they do this is because they want to maintain a monopoly on what's happening within the market. They want to be the only people selling manufactured goods. They want to be the only people selling agricultural goods. I think that's really important. But secondly, even in the medium term, what happens is that once they're transitioning, they have to invest capital back into these projects. So it's not like that they just make money and then distribute them by dividends amongst the Chinese people. They literally need that money to run the ports that they have taken control over, to run the ports that they have significantly taken over. I think that's really important. But lastly, this wealth is captured by patronage networks. These patronage networks exist across China. Yes, there is competition amongst them, but remember it is colored by the fact of who you know within the CCP, who have you done a deal with, etc., etc. I think that's very important to analyze. This leads to a complete absence of accountability. Because I think in the absence of accountability, opening government cannot win this debate if we can prove to you that these people are significantly disenfranchised. There are several cases. First case, China is held accountable, but for its international problems rather than domestic problems. This is literally what's happening right now. People in Washington, D.C. could not be less fucked about what's happening to people in Xinjiang. But there's several articles about, what about OBOR? It's terrible in Sub-Saharan Africa. What about OBOR? It's terrible in Southeast Asia. It's literally led to Chinese people being forgotten because they suffer a visibility problem. They have neither the social capital, the political capital, or the economic capital to talk about these things. That's the first case. The best case that they can have with China is somewhat held accountable for structural inequalities. The second case, I think, is which is much more likely, which OG sort of implicitly conceded to, is that you make friends within the governments who are most likely to take you into account. I think that's really, really important. So the point at which you invest into these countries, invest $900 billion in total amongst these countries, is the point at which they couldn't be less fucked to hold you to account, because you are literally investing into these countries, taking lots of money, etc., etc. These are often sold at prestige projects. I think that's really important. The point at which this happens, these countries become friends, and friends do not argue with each other. I think that's important. The third case then is, and this is what the literal endpoint of China's expansionism is, China can bully other countries into telling them that we will continue to commit human rights abuses within our country and you can't do shit about it. I think it's led to a very similar situation in the US-Saudi relationship, where the United States implicitly knows that because it owes like $3 trillion of debt to China, the first agenda on the table cannot exactly be the rights of the Uyghur minority. It literally has to be things like, let's move towards this structurally, etc., etc. Let's do some piecemeal bullshit reform. But in the vast majority of cases, it doesn't lead to anything. And this is very, very, very important to say. But secondly, what I want to say in terms of opening government is not just economic investment, it's actively backing political parties. What will these political parties look like? One, superficially, they want the Chinese government to be propped up. But I think they will use the same tools that the Chinese government uses. What are these tools like? These are tools of suppression, suppressing the media, suppressing the opposition, etc., etc. I think the point at which these sort of parties come into power is the point at which China knows that it has an ally in the region. What this means is that you're impacting not only these people, but also the Chinese people, because the Chinese people have less of an escape wall. You can't escape into Mongolia, Pakistan, or Bangladesh, or any of these places as an Uyghur minority, because they are literally fucking controlled by China. You lose the same political freedoms that you had in other countries also. I think that's fundamentally important. The last thing I want to say is that it legitimizes Xi. It legitimizes the rule that Xi has in terms of constitutionally becoming the president for virtually forever. It leads to more allies across the developing world and legitimizes the narrative of it being West versus China, an ideological war where only some people can benefit. This is literally the same ideology the United States used within World War II and World War I to fuck over people, saying, we will not give you benefits, we will ration your food, but we need this to fight the good fight. That's what China is doing at the detriment of the vast majority of Chinese people. We agree that the Chinese One Belt One Road program is a success story, but only for those who languish in Beijing. No one else. We're very, very proud to oppose.
Against the Chinese government, they lock you up. I think asserting an opening government, you get consent from these kind of things just because you get prosperity, was massively underdeveloped. In my speech, I'm going to respond to this. Firstly, I'm going to look at the economic development side of things and tackle their issues in that. And secondly, look at the trade-off that they thought this debate was about democracy and economics. First of all, clarifications in terms of what our case was, what went unresponded to, and rebuttal. Firstly, China co-opts perceived project narrative to do a couple of things. Firstly, to grant themselves immunity from human rights abuses, which directly affect the populations in China because they gain international legitimacy. They don't respond to the parts in Hans' speech which say, like, you're basically paying other countries to consent to you. I think the response when they talk about sanctions doesn't take into account that the West that impose sanctions aren't the ones that the Chinese is buying up. This makes the West actively more hostile against China, and makes hostile against China because they're being more aggressive and being more expansionist. You can see this in Trump's rhetoric. I think that's why that takes down part of opening government's case. But the second thing they never respond to is that through this prestige project, they're able to legitimize and strengthen the power of the autocratic technocracy, which eliminates any capacity for Chinese citizens to be able to have a voice. I think, given that the Chinese government operates on the basis of performative legitimacy, which Hamza tells you is necessarily uses indoctrination tactics to get this, they never justify why it's legitimate to strengthen the power of the elites to then stamp down the agency of the people. That's massively important in this debate and destroys any kind of path to democracy. We're going to tell you why that's important. But thirdly, in terms of alienating from the West, because China creates the narrative that they are the savior of these parts of the world and bolsters that narrative. I think they had to do much more to prove why the interests of the Chinese elites who capture the political sphere are directly aligned with the Chinese people. That wasn't something that was inserted. A couple of points for rebuttal. They say visibility comes from power, and therefore if you have an international influence, people care about you domestically. I mean, first of all, that's just completely asserted. But firstly, given that China directly uses international sphere to control the narrative, they presumably have much more control over what people think than anyone else does because no one looks in. But secondly, by their logic about getting more attention to what China's doing, you get more attention to what the Chinese government are focusing on, which under the political expansionism thing is things abroad, which means you focus on their policies and what they're doing in other countries, which directly detracts capital from things within China. Firstly, that's bad for people in China who get neglected, and therefore everyone cares about things that China are doing elsewhere. This is in Hamza's speech, no response. The second distinct thing they say is stability is the most important thing. Firstly, completely asserted, but note that this is literally entrenching the power of autocracy. They can see that when they say stability matters. complicated this. But let's look at what they said about economic development and how this interacts. Firstly, they say the counterfactual is sanctions and therefore that's bad because it destroys your economy. Again, non-comparative because it happens anyway, it makes the West more hostile. If that's their mechanism for why the economy is bad on their side, I think that's incredibly weak. It doesn't make sense. But that doesn't make sense. Then they accuse us of not having a comparative about how you get economic development in China. Very important. Obviously, invest domestically. Even if you sacrifice a bit of the growth because you have to pay more for labour, at least you're investing in your own people, and that's much a more direct trickle-down mechanism than going to an elite autocracy who use it to advance their narrative overseas. So I think giving domestic jobs is incredibly important. Hamza gave you specific analysis about why the Chinese government operates at lots and lots of places so they can get political buy-in in those domestic regions because they care about more about those governments respecting them than normal people having jobs. That's a very, very clear mechanism for why you displace Chinese workers into economic benefits overseas. We happily sacrifice a bit of growth if it means it gets directly put to the people. They say economic development is because of this. I think firstly, Hamza challenged us and we don't get any pushback about political expansionism being very different to trade and opening up borders in terms of trade. Loads of countries in the world trade but don't politically expand. So I think just intuitively that shows that's a different thing. But they don't respond to our mechanisms, but why you can never get trickle down. Firstly, because of lack of democratic mechanisms. Secondly, and this is new and important, because the process is incredibly opaque, which means even if they had given you any accountability mechanisms, no one knows what China's doing or how they're operating. It's incredibly hard for people to be able to claim back some of the money which they get from operating overseas. Specifically because this set of political agenda reorientates the incentives to be to make capital reinvestment being priority because you want to operate this prestige project to bolster your own thing. That's important because of the elite capture of the political system which has patronage networks. They can assert that patronage networks are decreasing, but there's no reason for that given they have literally more legitimacy and more capital because they can portray themselves as the saviors of big parts of the world. I think that's important. I'll speak in a bit. That's specifically important. But even that, I think all of this analysis proves why it's a per state poor because it entrenches the power of a system which has no incentives to ever redistribute or go back to them, given they literally get displaced because labour is cheaper elsewhere. Again, no response to that, which harms the Chinese population. But what's the trade-off they want to make this about? They say people consent to not having democracy because they get more prosperity and economic rights, not responding to Hamza's indoctrination stuff. But I think doing this way up is particularly important. Like having the ability to challenge your government, which is a more realistic counterfactual when the Chinese government isn't operating at a prestige project, and be able to completely control the narrative that they want to have and what they want to do politically means you have much more political freedom, which is integral to your identity. It's incredible to your ability to actualize your human rights and decide what kind of life you want to live. You can't buy human rights with money. I think the assertion that you can tell factory workers that their wages are the price of not having rights and not having political freedom is preposterous. Something they had to do much more to justify than just saying you'll prefer having money and therefore that's good. I'll take closing.
So how and why do you think democracy will have to rise in China on the US side?
I mean, I think it's significantly more likely when you have international pressure, when you have people focusing on what China is doing domestically rather than diverting the process to abroad. That means you have countries, particularly around China, you're probably countries around China or like in the region or international institutions are much more incented to be able to criticise what they're doing when it's not just a whole prestige project abroad. I think this distorts the focus and gives Chinese autocracy specifically too much power. I think a political system which has firstly incentives to cater to its domestic population significantly more strongly has more incentives to democratise because there's a clear mechanism of wanting to hold them to account. But when they can distort focus, they need significantly less consent from their domestic populations to gain performative legitimacy because they can say we are the ruling country, we're dominating this region, we're doing all these things. That kind of narrative is incredibly politically powerful rather than granting rights. I think it's significantly more likely in our case, but even in the case where they want to talk about why political freedoms wouldn't happen anyway, we think the economic benefits get massively concentrated within the elite political class. I think Hamza proved that too. I think we get pushed back from that. That's incredibly important. We think China should invest domestically. But I think in terms of this way up, anything they say about like tacit consent, which had no justification, is states instrumentalizing people without consent to be able to get an outcome which they assert for their own value system is the most important thing. So telling the Chinese people the material benefits, the thing you should care about the most, is what allows them to detract focus to overseas because they can justify through the opaque process, by the way, of investing overseas. They're justifying that by saying we're growing your economy and getting more money for you, while they're literally robbing wages from Chinese workers, robbing agency from Chinese workers to criticise the government because human rights abuses go completely covered over because they champion this narrative of being the saviours of that region. I think that's incredibly important. I don't think we got any pushback from that. Even in their best case, it empowers the Chinese government, another tool of indoctrination, because they have much more legitimacy from all other countries, while they literally divert funds from Chinese people elsewhere, and because they need to appeal to political leaders in other parts of the country. I think that's incredibly powerful. We think, being able to stopping this in power, this specific narrative, is important to empower the vulnerable. But I think we prove to you why you don't get the economic benefits you get. We think you get significantly more development when you work with the West and liberalise built institutions which are much more powerful and much more powerful to the people than what they want to do. And very correct.